G'day, May 40 here. So the news media is still in an absolute fury trying to get to the bottom of Joe Biden's cognitive decline and what it means for American politics. And there is just rage on the part of Democrats in particular that they've been deceived and lied to by the Biden administration. The Biden administration shows absolutely no capacity for understanding why people are so enraged. But I'm going to give credit to the mainstream media. All right, they are still making this their number one story. They're doing really solid reporting. So here's the top of the New York Times right now. All right, Biden's lapses are said to be increasingly common. All right, this is New York Times. Biden lapses are said to be increasingly common and wearisome, and they've dramatically increased over the past few weeks and months. Right, this is New York Times, right, driving the news agenda, still on top of the Joe Biden cognitive decline story. And if the situation were reversed, let's say that Donald Trump was president and he was exhibiting all the signs that Joe Biden is showing, how do you think the right-wing media would cover him? I don't think that they would show as much enthusiasm for facts as the mainstream media is doing with regard to Joe Biden. So the right-wing media talked a lot about the 2020 elections being rigged, but they never bothered to make a substantial case. And where was the right-wing media in their reporting on Joe Biden's cognitive decline? You got videos and you got snarky remarks, and it was just the accepted wisdom that Joe Biden was in cognitive decline. But nobody in the right-wing news media cared to nail down the story. The closest that we got to this story getting substantiated was the Wall Street Journal finally running a story on Joe Biden's cognitive decline about 3 months ago. But the Wall Street Journal didn't have the story nailed down because all of the people that they were quoting about Joe Biden's cognitive decline were Republicans, right, who had a vested interest. Jill Abramson, right, she's a left-winger, former editor of the New York Times. She says it's clear the best news reporters in Washington have failed in the first duty of journalism, to hold power accountable. Why didn't the Republican Party spend $100,000 or $1 million and fund solid investigative reporters about Joe Biden's cognitive health? Right? The Republican Party could have released a substantial report on this, and they couldn't be bothered to do that. Jill Abramson says it's duty to poke through White House smokescreens and find out the truth. The Biden White House clearly succeeded in a massive cover-up of the degree of the president's feebleness and his serious physical decline. Shame on the White House press corps for not having pierced the veil of secrecy surrounding the president. Yes, that's true, but why didn't the right-wing media do the same thing? The president's decline was a hard story to report, even by those who wanted to get it, like the Wall Street Journal, and their story did not deliver because they used mostly named GOP sources. If enough journalists had pushed, the story was reportable. I worry that too many journalists didn't try to get the story because they did not want to be accused of helping to elect Donald Trump. But there is no excuse for abandoning our first duty, which is to report the truth. President Biden should be held accountable for his obvious lapses of mental acuity. It is astonishing for the entire country, including its most seasoned reporters, to be as shocked as everyone by the ugly and painful reality of Biden's debate performance. And it is laughable and immoral for Democrats to blame the press now for overreacting to that reality. The reports of how bad Biden was certainly not exaggerated, nor are the reports of Democrats in panic. And there's been a lot of wise commentary about what's going on in this story. But I think this was about the wisest thing that I've heard, at least today. A very wise man here.
Mate 40 here. So one of the least attractive traits is helplessness. Unnecessary learned helplessness. I find it very unattractive, and it seems to be dominating the majority opinion in American politics right now. That it's just inevitable that Joe Biden will become the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States. And Joe Biden is manifestly unfit to be President of the United States. Right? He made that clear last Thursday night in his disastrous performance at a debate with Donald Trump. The other thing that kills me about the majority pundit reaction is that Joe Biden's perfectly capable of operating as President of the United States. He's just not capable of campaigning for President of the United States. So Joe Biden apparently has a hard time getting going before 10 a.m. and he has a hard time operating after 4 p.m. So he has about 6 hours a day where he can do work. And this is acceptable for President of the United States. If we get into a nuclear crisis, And only the President of the United States can make the call whether or not we launch nuclear weapons. That can't be devolved onto his staff. So what you hear from the Biden team is that he has a highly competent staff, and when you're voting for Joe Biden, you're also voting for his highly competent staff. But this is the same side who's been making the argument for the past 5 years that democracy is on the ballot and that voting for Joe Biden is a vote for democracy. But people didn't vote for Joe Biden's staff. Right? He clearly has not been up to the office of President of the United States since he took office. Right? He was saved from having to campaign by COVID. Like a frail old man who had that vacant, checked out stare back in 2018. And now the cognitive decline has apparently become particularly precipitous over the past few months in 2024. And then here's another element of the learned helplessness that seems to dominate much of American political discourse among elites right now, and that is, well, by all the rules, all the procedures, by all the precedents, according to the bylaws, Joe Biden is going to become the Democratic nominee for president because the laws say that, because he won the delegates, and if he's determined to run as the Democratic nominee for president, no one can stop him. Right? So this is the legal perspective. So what's more powerful, right? Is it the situation or is it the law? I contend to you that the situation has more power than the law. But the dominant discourse among elites with regard to Joe Biden right now is that the law says that Joe Biden...
So another way of stating that is that sometimes the narrative, the culture, is more important than the law, right? Law gets its power from the narrative.
Going to be the Democratic nominee for president. But when following the law results in a suicidal choice, right? Running Joe Biden for president of the United States is a suicidal choice not just for the Democrats, but also for the country. The United States of America is in peril right now because a senile old man who is checked out much of the time mentally and just cognitively not there is in the office.
Okay, so one of the more pompous lines that I hear in the news media and among people in general, particularly among the elite, is how depressing our state of politics is and how depressing is Joe Biden's cognitive decline. And so I think it's accurate to say there are things to worry about Joe Biden's cognitive decline. There are dangers to the United States. But to say that it's depressing is pompous because you're asserting that you understand the highly complicated nature of reality and you have no idea how good the next president of the United States will be, because certain people will succeed in certain circumstances. In different situations, other people will succeed. We don't know whether this Joe Biden cognitive decline is overall good or bad for the country. Right? There are reasons to be concerned. There are reasons to be worried. But sometimes a less active president is a more effective president. Sometimes an employee who does less is better suited for your best interest than an employee who does more. Right? Often politicians who do less, right, are better for the country than politicians who do more. So absolutely no reason to be depressed about the United States of America and its political situation right now, just because of Joe Biden's obvious decline. All right, it may very well be a blessing that Joe Biden is in cognitive decline, because that'll open up other possibilities.
For the President of the United States. So I'm a big respecter of law and order. I love the law, but there are things that are more important than the law, such as survival and the health and protection of your people. And so America is an incredibly individualist country, and as a result, in individualist countries, it's probably the most individualist country, everything has to be negotiated, right? You have to negotiate more things in more depth in the United States than any other country of which I'm aware, because it's so individualist, and therefore there's so little...
Right, you have to get an agent or you have to get an attorney for more things in the United States. The law and negotiating contracts and just the intrusion of legal details and the necessity of negotiating so many details, right, seems to penetrate and overwhelm life more in the United States than any other country of which I'm aware.
Common feeling, right? You definitely have to negotiate far more of life in the United States compared to Australia, which on a world stage is probably in the top 10 of individualist countries. But you still have to negotiate much more your interactions and your contracts and your procedures in the United States than in Australia or in England or in New Zealand, these other individualist countries, or in Canada. Because in a country that was not as individualist, right, it had more of a sense of common feeling, more of a sense of nationhood. Right? This situation would be governed more by norms, right, meaning understanding what is right and wrong, than by laws. But in the United States, because we have so little social trust, we don't tend to devolve as many of these decisions to norms because we don't share many norms because we're so varied, so diverse. We have so little social cohesion and social trust, and so we have to overwhelmingly depend upon law and precedent and procedure much more than any other country. Now, is the law a veto in this extreme situation? And I contend to you, the law is not a death.
And Stephen J. James has popped into the chat. He says, I am bullish on America. My time here has made me realize this place has much more going for it than the black pillars had me believe. Even the majority Hispanic areas run fine.
Warrant. The United States Constitution is not a death warrant. And I'll give you some analogies. I know a lot of Japanese, and they will contend to me that Japan is severely limited in the steps that it can take to defend itself because of its constitution that was imposed upon it by the United States. And so the Japanese have come to love the learned helplessness that they've developed by noting, well, our constitution was imposed on us by the United States and it severely limits what we can do to build up a military to defend ourselves, and so we have to rely on the United States for military protection. This is like women I've dated who, once we get locked into that intimate relationship and they know I want to keep coming back, they start becoming more and more helpless and start offloading onto me more and more things that they're perfectly capable of doing for themselves, such as a Google search or all sorts of things that they think, oh, this will make me more feminine, more attractive, and lock me into this relationship with 40 if I can be helpless. That 40 loves me because I'm pathetic. And initially, that has been a turn on. I was able to sweep into a woman's life and transform it and rescue her, right? There was a brief period where that was a turn on, but it very quickly becomes a turn off. And Japan has operated, even though its security situation is going increasingly dire with the rise of China, with this learned helplessness. Oh, well, because of the Constitution that the US imposed upon us, we have to rely on America to protect us. Well, if breaking your Constitution is what is required to survive, are not the Japanese ready to break the Constitution or to change the Constitution? Right? Law, Constitution should not be a death warrant. Similarly, there's the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and many Jews would abide by this commandment, and they would not fight back on the Sabbath, and as a result, they were slaughtered. Well, this didn't last very long in Jewish life. Very quickly, the rabbis, approximately 2,200 years ago, made the point, if you need to fight to survive on the Sabbath, then you should absolutely fight. So you can't just check out from your responsibilities by saying, oh, it's the Sabbath. Sabbath prohibits us from doing work.
Okay, so press 1 in the chat if you think Biden is going to go and step down from running for president. Right, so I contend that the situation is more powerful than the law and legal precedent. So all the laws, all the precedents are that Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee, that he's won the delegates, he's won the competition, he's the man, according to law, according to precedent, according to the dominant view from pundits, from the experts. All right, it's just locked in that Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee. I say the narrative is so powerful about Joe Biden's cognitive decline, the situation is so horrifying about Joe Biden's cognitive decline, that the power of the narrative and the situation of Joe Biden's cognitive decline will prevail over all the legal precedents that Joe Biden already has the nomination locked up.
Work includes picking up weapons. We can't protect ourselves because God said so. Right? And those Jews who took that attitude got wiped out. Well, the Jews who were willing to pick up weapons and fight back on the Sabbath, they survived. In 1973, Israel was attacked on Yom Kippur, and Jews grabbed their weapons, and after a couple of days of significant losses and setbacks, right, they fought back and eventually won. Approximately 2,000 years ago in Jewish life, in Israel, the Jewish law of not loaning at interest meant that funds for loans had essentially dried up. And so Rabbi Hillel came along with an emendation to the law, allowing something called a prusbal, so that when you lend money to a fellow Jew for his business, it wasn't a loan, it was an investment. And he created a way that you could lend money to your fellow Jews essentially at interest, but it's not called lending, it's called investing. So America, in general, the United States, Democrats in particular, right, they have a choice. Do you want to just go along with the learned helplessness that Joe Biden's won the delegates? He has the right to be Democratic nominee for president, and he's clearly unfit for office and clearly unfit to campaign. Or will the dam start breaking? See, we can only maintain our allegiance to law within certain narratives. Right? Law also depends upon narrative. And so the narrative that we have to follow the law is a powerful narrative, and that's perhaps the most powerful narrative right now with regard to Joe Biden. But if another narrative became more powerful, such as that Joe Biden is manifestly unfit to be president of the United States.
Okay, so that is my presentation of situation versus law. And sometimes the power of the situation is more important than the power of the law. So, yeah, the mainstream media never nailed down the story of Joe Biden's cognitive decline, but neither did the right-wing media, neither did the Republican Party. All right, if you were interested in defeating Joe Biden, right, why didn't you invest some resources into nailing down the story of his cognitive decline? And if you're concerned about voter fraud, the great steal of the 2020 election from the perspective of many Republicans, why didn't one single one just nail down that story? And not one did. If you are concerned about the unconstitutional nature of all these various lockdowns, and if you think that the elite response to COVID was ridiculous and terrible and stupid and idiotic and a crime, right? Why didn't you nail down that case? Right? Why didn't you put together the arguments in a coherent fashion? So, yeah, the mainstream media failed on this story, but I have far more respect for the mainstream media's respect for facts in many areas in life than I do for the right-wing media. But why did the mainstream media, the liberal media, have such a giant blind spot here? Right? Is there any wider lesson? And the most elite, prestigious columnist working today is Janan Ganesh. He's of Sri Lankan origin. He writes for the Financial Times, and he says, is there anything that we can learn? Is this of a piece with a pattern of behavior on the Anglo-American left? Right? If the Democrats had simply chosen a better candidate than Hillary Clinton in 2016, right, they likely would have defeated Donald Trump. Joe Biden would have defeated Donald Trump in 2016. And so what is it about left liberalism, in particular in the Anglo world, that creates this maladaptive reality distortion field? Right. And Janan Ganesh says that the test of seriousness in politics is an appetite to confront one's own side. Bill Clinton did that with his Sister Soldier moment in 1992. But on this score, liberals are absent, right? And failing to say the obvious about Joe Biden is just one example. All right, everybody knows he's unfit for public office. He should not be president of the United States right now. And anyone who's enabling the ridiculous Joe Biden administration, all right, is just falling down on the job if you're in journalism or if you consider telling the truth important. So another example of liberal left blindness is constant evasiveness about the woke movement, right? So the left tries all sorts of lines that wokeism is just good manners, that right-wingers are making it all up, that cancel culture often fails, so what's the fuss, that defund the police means let's think hard about constructive reform of the police, right? So what is it about the liberal left that makes it so craven, right? Why is the liberal left just walking on eggshells in so many areas, such as the obvious nature of Joe Biden's cognitive decline? Like, why does the left think, oh, there are no enemies to the left of us? So even now, after that Thursday night debate fiasco, Democrats are couching their misgivings about Joe Biden in highly ambiguous language. Right? The passive voice is getting a strenuous workout. Right? What has the priority is this 19th century Victorian gentleman etiquette of the buffered, enlightened identity. Right? Rather than going with your visceral impulses, obviously he is unfit. So maybe that is the source. So generally speaking, children of the Enlightenment, right, people on the liberal left have an Enlightenment worldview, and that usually carries with it a respect for facts, except in certain things, all right, such as group differences, and in certain things that just hit too close to home, respect for facts goes away. And the nature of liberal left identity is that you can't trust your basic impulses. They need to be refined and disciplined and enlightened and elevated. And here is one summary of the essence of the liberal left perspective, that the asceticism and self-control of Protestantism, right, the liberal left perspective on life is a secularized type of Protestantism. So essentially the asceticism and self-control of the liberal left buffered identity is aimed against one thing: the spontaneous enjoyment of life and all that it has to offer. So the liberal left buffered high IQ perspective on life is that we have to be highly skeptical of our spontaneous reactions, and we have to refine them and keep becoming ever more reflexive, noticing the effect of our words and behavior on other people so that we don't say or do anything that might in particular disadvantage communities of color. So there's some killer blindness here. It's elevated Edwardian drawing room etiquette to an absurd degree. So you can't talk about obvious group differences, right? People who are at ease with talking about differences between men and women, differences between members of different religions, different ethnic groups, right? People who are at ease with noticing group differences have always had a much easier time noticing that Joe Biden was cognitively checked out. But if you understand that nature of life is that different people have different gifts, and that there are different gifts with different phases of life, and cognitive sharpness is not usually a gift of people who are 81 years of age, right? If you're that kind of realist, then you had no problem for years noting that Joe Biden was not cognitively there. But people on the left and people among our elites and the dominant center left that runs most of our institutions, perhaps one thing that blocked them from saying the obvious was this notion of ageism, right? For realists, for people on the right, there's no such moral category as ageism or sexism or racism or Islamophobia or homophobia. We understand that these are all just natural human reactions that can be healthy unless taken to an extreme degree, right? Many of the predispositions that lead to a woke or a left-wing or a liberal worldview are healthy in moderation. It's when they become extreme that they go wacko. And the liberal left's inability to say you can go too far with diversity and inclusion and equity, right? You can go too far with racial theorizing in a way that sacralizes various marginalized groups such as blacks, homosexuals, Puerto Ricans, indigenous Mexicans, etc. Right? This sacralizing of different groups and saying that they must be held off limits to public criticism, right? That's another gigantic interference with an accurate understanding of reality. And it is crazy that Joe Biden is getting much of his advice, right, from his crack addict son, Hunter Biden. I mean, what the hell?
Debate. Longtime allies distancing themselves from the big guy. And in the midst of the code red, a new influential Biden advisor has emerged.
We're now learning that Hunter Biden is attending some of the president's meetings at the White House, staying close to his father post-debate.
Sounds like a good idea. After all, Hunter's the smartest man Joe knows.
He is the smartest man I know. I mean, in sort of pure intellectual capacity.
I spent more time on my hands and knees picking through rugs, smoking anything that even remotely resembled crack cocaine. I probably smoked more Parmesan cheese than anyone that you know.
Well, that's reassuring. Ukrainian expert, a professional artist. I do like his artwork, I'll say that. Suspended lawyer, and now it looks like he's trying to nab the nuclear football. Hey, anything's possible. But the reaction from senior White House staff has been less than inviting. Check this out. An NBC reporter posting, quote, "The reaction from some senior White House staff has been, what the hell is happening?" The White House says it's no big deal.
Why is the president's son involved?
Look, the president, as you know, is very close to his family. He spent time with his family, as you all know and reported, at Camp David. Hunter came back with him and walked with him into that meeting, that speech prep, and he ended up spending time with his dad and his family that night. That is basically what happened.
Yes, the question, though, would be, is he participating in meetings with senior advisors?
What I can say is that he came back with his dad from Camp David. He walked him into the speech prep, and he was in the room.
Maybe Joe's clinging to Hunter because he's unwilling to tell him the hard truth.
Right. The Bidens don't really have advisors. They only have employees. Stephen James has a good point. If a senile old man can be president of the United States and everything rolls along just fine, perhaps the presidency is overrated. Kamala could probably even do it. Yeah, in many circumstances, the presidency is overrated, right? 99% of the time, it doesn't matter much to 99% of people who is president of the United States. But then you occasionally have emergencies where it does matter. For example, Joe Biden has gotten the United States much more deeply involved in the disastrous Ukraine war and in the Middle East war between Israel and its enemies than I think Donald Trump would have done. And so we are closer to a nuclear exchange with Russia. We're closer to some complete disaster due to Joe Biden's foreign policy, which has been the worst, most dangerous foreign policy since before World War II, right? So if that kicks off into a major disaster, right, that's due to Joe Biden. There are occasions where only the president can make the call, such as the release of nuclear weapons, right? You're under some kind of attack and the United States needs to fight back, then it takes the president of the United States to make the call. How many times sensitive things does the president even need to be sharp for anyway? Yeah, most of the time you're going to be fine with a checked out senile president. And Stephen James says, yes, the Republican Party is equally saddled with Donald Trump. Donald Trump's a deeply flawed person who is accurately criticized by the mainstream media at times. The only way to get rid of Donald Trump is to elect him. Can you imagine if they have to go through all this again in 4 years with an 82-year-old Trump? Right, so if Donald Trump was president of the United States and he had this degree of cognitive decline, I don't think the right-wing media would be covering themselves with glory. Right? When Trump won the presidency, the right-wing media overwhelmingly just caved to him. Yeah, many things can probably wait till Joe Biden has his nap and had porridge. Yeah, usually that's fine. But then there are things like the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Occasionally, a president can make a significant difference, right? Most of the time, not so much, but you really want to take the chance. In Politic is John Heilman's podcast, and here he talks to political strategist David Axelrod from the Democrats and Mike Murphy, an anti-Trump Republican.
Folks, I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. I know right from wrong. And I know how to do this job.
So David Axelrod, Mike Murphy, the legendary Hacks on Tap here. And I have so many.
So another thing that struck me about this story, just so many things just like pouring into me about this story. And I always have a tendency to try to extrapolate lessons. But you'll notice that the more Biden goes into decline and the more he becomes removed from reality, the more desperately his family tries to protect him. And they keep making his life smaller and smaller and narrower. And the circle around Joe Biden gets smaller and narrow and smaller and tighter and tighter. And it's like that with all of our maladaptive tension patterns, right? The more disconnected we get from reality, the more we have to tense up to try to bull our way through life opposed to reality. And we get smaller and tighter and smaller and tighter and tighter and weirder. And that's the same dynamic that's happening with the Joe Biden administration. And I love what Mickey Kaus says here. It's none of my business, but I think a draft of Joe Biden's resignation speech should be written by someone who is in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, because of the need for total honesty, because the false things that Joe Biden has told himself when he convinced himself that he was good to go for 4 more years are probably similar to the false things that addicts tell about themselves. Or he could just have Peggy Noonan write it. Yeah, there is a quality in 12-step programs that I have not found elsewhere. It's the best tool of which I'm aware for coming to terms with how one has contributed to one's own feelings and developing a moral inventory. So it usually begins by making a list of your biggest resentments. Right. So I had a list of rabbis that I resented because they asked me to leave their synagogue. So that was the activating event. Rabbi asked me to leave their synagogue. Then why was I so resentful? Because it reduced my chances to score with women. It reduced my social health. It reduced my self-esteem, right? It reduced chances of getting jobs and connections. So it reduced, it threatened my pocketbook. It threatened my financial security, my emotional security, my sexual life, my love life, my standing in the community. It diminished my opportunity to be close to the people I wanted to be close to. I became isolated and marginalized. My life was devastated by these ejections. Right? So now I've come to terms with the harm that was inflicted on me. Then the next column is, what role did I play? Well, I created all this because I was conducting myself online in a way that the Orthodox Jewish community cannot countenance. All right, I was trying to join a community and simultaneously defying and dirtying the community. All right, and so if I had simply had a normal level of appropriate behavior for an Orthodox Jew, I wouldn't have had these problems. I was the cause of my problems. And so as I go through my various resentments, I never had much of a relationship with my father. Well, why is that? Because from a very early age, I wanted to live my life as freely as possible outside the home. So I'd learn to code switch. I would behave one way inside the home, and then I completely disregard everything that my father held sacred outside the home. Hence, I put myself on a collision course with my father, and I kept doing things that would horrify and appall my father, and eventually he found out about them, and that caused irreparable damage to my relationship with my father. So I played a significant role in destroying my relationship with my father. My father told me not to touch his stereo, but I used it anyway, and I broke it. I did countless things like that. So the 12-step model is an excellent model for coming to terms with reality, and it sounds like it's something that Joe Biden and his team should be doing.
Many things. First of all, I want to say, you guys, your podcast on Friday with Pluff in the wake of the debate was excellent, and just riddled with intimations of doom, and I appreciated that. And I guess before I ask you about that Joe Biden thing from North Carolina on Friday, I'll just ask you, at this hour, as we sit here on Monday, July the 1st, is your level of alarm / apocalyptic dread over the state of things higher or lower than it was on Friday?
Well, it's certainly not lower. I mean, it is what it is. It's not going to change. The problem with this was the president, his team asked for this debate, and they did it to try and allay and assuage concerns about his condition and his acuity and so on. And it just deepened those concerns. And it maybe, we'll see what the polling implications of that are. But the problem is he's starting from a baseline of losing, and instead of picking up and gaining, he may have hardened positions.
So this is a fun time to be on the right, and Donald Trump is playing it correctly. He's behaving in a more disciplined fashion than we've ever seen him do before. He is delaying his announcement of who his vice president will be to allow the national media focus to remain on Joe Biden's cognitive decline and all the Democratic leaders who have been lying for him, except for the majority leader of the Senate. All right, Chuck Schumer has not been going on TV speaking up for Joe Biden. But there have been many ridiculous sentiments on the right. And one of them is that every right-wing conspiracy theory is correct. So what the hell? That begins with Glenn Greenwald post. CNN admits something embarrassing. Many in media failed to report on Biden's cognitive issues because they feared blowback from the White House, and Democrats or worse. Age stories angered the White House and the liberal Twitter sphere the most. That is not insane. This is not the media in general. They're talking about beat reporters. All right, when you have a beat, such as the White House or the Los Angeles Lakers, where you're showing up every day, beat reporters rarely break brave stories because they'll then lose access to all their sources. So it's only unbelievably embarrassing if you fail to honestly confront the incentives that beat reporters operate under. Right? It's not embarrassing. It's not bizarre. It's not unusual that beat reporters don't pursue stories that will make their tenure as a beat reporter impossible. I remember I had an offer to write an internet column about the pornography industry, and it was the most lucrative offer I'd ever had. But it was in the aftermath of my appearance on 60 Minutes, which I think occurred in 2003. And I'd said some critical things about the pornography industry. And so the person who was extending the offer to me to write a regular daily blog on the porn industry, he said, well, I don't think anyone will talk to you in the industry now that you've said these critical things. And so I had to assure him that I still had enough sources. It's hard to write a irregular column on a very specific industry or on a specific facility if everyone there hates you, right? And so this is just a dishonest perspective that is unbelievably embarrassing, that beat reporters don't write stories that would make their job impossible. And so Mike Ben's response, honest question, has a right-wing conspiracy theory ever been wrong? What a ridiculous question. Of course, all the time. Think about Pizzagate. Think about the various theories about some European economic group, all the theories about the UN ruining our lives, right? The UN has very little power. The World Health Organization has very little power. The COVID lockdowns overall were right policy. COVID vaccines overall were the right policy. So most right-wing conspiracy theories have been bogus, just like most left-wing conspiracy theories have been bogus. And so I don't care for this tendency among right-wing pundits to give the people what they want by lambasting the powers that be unfairly, right? The powers that be deserve accurate criticism, right? They deserve to be held accountable, but they do not deserve inaccurate criticism, and they don't deserve ridicule when their behavior does not warrant ridicule. It's just too easy to say that the prosaic powers that run our lives are insane, like Tucker Carlson would do, that they hate you, right? The leaders of our country, they just all hate you, right? That's just playing to a low IQ audience, giving them what they want. If right-wing conspiracy theories are always right, as Mike Ben says, then who are the brave truth tellers retailing these right-wing conspiracy theories, right? You're talking about people such as Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and Jack Posobiec and Milo and that cat turd fellow, right? None of them are intellectually rigorous, right? So if right-wing conspiracy theories were consistently standing up, then who are the people who are spreading these consistently correct right-wing conspiracy theories, all right? The right-wing pundits, who are the equivalent of Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, Jack Posobiec, Milo, and Cat Turd, are not intellectually rigorous, impressive people. They are sometimes entertaining, but they're not exactly truth tellers.
So, I mean, I
this
think
is David Axelrod.
My phone's been ringing off the hook, or my text has been blowing up, or whatever you want to say. I mean, there's a lot of concern. I don't think that's not exactly news. It's not even puck-worthy.
Yeah, right. Let's just take a little shot on the way there. Mike, are you in a better place, a worse place, or?
So Puck is a subscription news analysis site that caters to the highly educated, highly intelligent, and high achieving.
Just the same place you were on Friday.
I'm a little worse, but here's what's going on. Well, you know what they say.
He was born grumpy. Let's point that out.
Yeah. Kipling had the great quote, a toast to the Irish, the race God made mad. Their wars are all happy, their songs are all sad. So I'm in sad song mode right now. I would like to have a happy war, but that would require a candidate.
Bookie's favorite for Trump's VP pick is Tim Scott. No way. I would prefer J.D. Vance. Right? If Trump picks J.D. Vance, that means that Trump wants to keep MAGA going in a younger generation.
Yeah. So here's what I'm wondering. The Biden folks are out stamping out dissent. Right. And if Biden it was a bad night, then it's the easiest thing in the world to fix. You go put them on television in a two-way town hall.
Right. That's what the Biden team keeps saying, that it's just a problem that people don't understand how awesome Joe Biden really is, and they just have to do a better job with their public relations. But that's absurd, right? Joe Biden could not stand up to the scrutiny of any normal TV news interview.
You go sit down with Leslie Stahl. Why hasn't any of that happened? Well, that makes me think, ooh, this is the guy we got. And that makes me think, bad trouble. I don't like their reaction of this phony logic of, well, if we don't have Biden, we have Harris, and Harris is worse than Biden, so we have to have Harris. You know, it's a logic trick, like a magician's
Biden. We have
card
to
trick.
have Biden.
We have to have Biden. So, I want to see what the next 72 hours, see if they do it. They're tamping down the dissent well, but the public polls are going to start coming out, and I'm seeing some private stuff, and it ain't great. So I have a feeling they're going to have a new panic by next weekend. And unless Biden can go out and fix this with television and interaction, real voters, journalists, somebody, it's going to be a long month.
Let me just say.
Right. I suspect there's going to be a tidal wave of Democratic politicians speaking out and saying Joe Biden must go. And at a certain point, the pressure will become too much. And against all precedent, Joe Biden will step aside.
About that it's really interesting reading these stories and talking to people. Calls are being made to calm people. They're being made by Jen O'Malley Dillon. They're being made by Jeff Zients, the White House chief of staff. They're being made by Steve Ricchetti, who's a counselor to the president. They're not being made by the president. He's not calling people. And I don't know what that means, but it seems odd to me that, if there are questions about you, then you should be calling your key people and telling them, hey, hang in there, I'm okay.
Right,
they're not
proving
doing that.
it with the call.
Yeah, so your point, Murphy, is right.
So, first of all, during the debate, right, Biden's team leaked that he had a cold, but then after the debate, Joe Biden went out. He then gave, for him, a strong speech in, North Carolina the next day. Joe Biden himself has never used the cold excuse, and there appears to be no empirical basis for claiming that Joe Biden has a cold. Now, this is what the Biden team is trying to argue. Right. Joe Biden says to donors, I wasn't very smart. I was trying to travel around the world a couple of times, went through 15 time zones. I didn't listen to my staff. Then I came back and I nearly fell asleep on stage. Right. This was 11 days before the debate. Right. He had 11 days to rest up for the debate. And has Joe Biden ever been someone who takes accountability? Right. He's always been a hack. He's always had among the lowest possible IQs for his position. He was lucky to be born and to grow up in Delaware, right? Very small state, much easier to become a senator from a small state. He doesn't have a track record of taking accountability and making apologies and staying connected to reality. And so his team is just spinning out lie and deception after lie and deception.
But the fallacy of the whole thing, and I know you know this, and this is why you raise it, is nobody really believes it was just a bad night.
Right. Until unproven, and there's a lot of not unproven going on.
Right. Well, so just to come back to the clip we played, because, and this is almost too unsophisticated a question to ask the two of you, because but I find it so bonkers that they put him out on Friday, and he's lifelike and energetic, and he reads off the teleprompter well. And they literally are going around saying to people that shows something like he's bounced back. I find it just like almost insulting, and I know that there are donors and electeds who find it insulting also, which is kind of like, yeah, he went out there and read off the prompter in an animated way. What does that prove? But they actually kind of with a straight face. It's not like it would have been fine to do that event and then do 60 Minutes on something.
So a friend says that Twitter considers it a mistake if you don't capitalize Muslim, right, or various religions, but not Christian, right? No problem on Twitter, no prompts if you fail to capitalize Christian. It's just like many newspapers, and I think the Associated Press, they capitalize black, but they don't capitalize white, because blacks are real and white is just a fake identity.
Monday or something, but to just do that
and he
event
did the
and
whole
have
rope line. You know, that's the other big one. He did the whole rope line.
Doesn't that seem crazy
the county
to you?
commissioner can do that.
Doesn't that seem crazy to you to hang so much on that? Like, just as a matter of like trying to their credibility, they just seem foolish to me to be talking to like political reporters or electeds or donors and saying, "Did you see him on Friday?"
Yeah, I mean, this is a endemic and deep problem.
Right. Here's a comic with a good
He said,
line
if you
here
think someone's
about,
ruined your life, you're right.
Nietzsche.
It's you. Like, that's a mic drop, isn't it? Nietzsche had the great line on resentment. He said, if you think someone's ruined your life, you're right. It's you.
Yeah. It's a line that Joe Biden should take in.
That can't be solved with palliatives. You know, I mean, I don't take any joy in this at all. You know, I mean, I really, you know.
So what could Trump achieve in a second term? More of what he achieved in the first term. For the first time, we had an answer to illegal immigration. He substantially reduced refugee intake. He substantially reduced immigration intake. He reduced American foreign policy that was intervening all over the world. He was the first president in 20 years not to start a new war. So he changed the direction of American trade policy, and he dramatically increased the income and the wages of the least educated Americans, right? The first president to make a significant dent in that needed category in about 70 years. And he got 3 conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court.
I worked with Joe Biden. I was thrilled to be working with him when he was VP. He brought a point of view and an energy to our discussions that was really valuable, And I think he's, you know, then Murphy and I could probably debate this, but I think he's done a lot of really, really significant, historic things as president. All of that.
So what do we have to look forward to from a second Trump term? Here is an analysis by a young female lesbian who's frightened to death of Trump.
Reelected. You may and here are the first 15 promises he has made if he is reelected. You may have heard of Project 2025, but this is from Agenda 47, and you can read all of these on his website. First, he promises that he will carry out the largest domestic deportation operation in history. He will also ask for the death sentence for anyone convicted of human trafficking. He will close the Department of Education and return all education standards to the states to decide. He will put prayer back into school, and he will criminalize any race-based advantage programs. He will end the Affordable Care Act. He will ban gender-affirming care for adults and children, and he will ban any federal dollars from going towards gender-affirming care, which means anyone with government-provided health care will no longer be able to access gender-affirming care except for Viagra and Cialis. Those will still be available. He will propose a constitutional amendment that gives a term limit to Congress. He will deploy the Department of Justice to investigate the Biden crime family and any of his adversaries or political rivals. He will immediately pardon all of the January 6thers, and he will create a task force to investigate anyone who arrested, charged, or imprisoned a January 6er. He will increase the penalties for underage criminal offenders, strengthen immunity for police officers, and deploy the National Guard to patrol woke cities. On day one, he will reassess our participation in NATO and says that every European country needs to pay the United States for protection. He will also restore the wonderful travel ban for Muslims coming to America. He will build freedom cities. This is 10 new cities built on federal land. He will award them to areas with the best development proposals, and he will prioritize moving young families to these freedom cities. He will kill all e-vehicles and e-vehicle legislation, seeking to replace that with the development of a flying car. He believes that we could create a car that vertically takes off. He will remove all of the limits on American natural gas exports and drill baby drill for oil domestically. He will impose a tariff of up to 60% on Chinese imports. He will extend the 2017 tax cuts and drop the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%. He will push Congress to pass legislation that would give every American the right to concealed carry anywhere at any time. And he will revoke any gun restrictions or legislation that seeks to inhibit people's ability to own guns that's been passed in the last several years. He will demand that Europe pay back all the money we gave Ukraine, and then he will use all of that money to recruit for the American military. And he will take billions and billions of dollars from private university endowments by taxing, fining, and suing the universities. He specifically names Harvard in this one. And then he will use that money to create the American Academy. It is a free online college that will be free of wokeness that he will force employers to recognize as a bachelor's degree equivalent. So that's Agenda 47.
Okay, much of it sounds ridiculous, but also some of it sounds great, and none of it exactly frightens me. So thank you.
That is true, but when I hear the First Lady say that we're not going to let 90 bad minutes erase, a historic 3.5-year record, that is not the point. That's a problem, because elections are not about the last 4 years.
And Stephen J. James makes a great point here. How do I feel about the anti-Trump argument that Trump galvanized the left? Yes, Donald Trump more effectively galvanized the left than he did the right. Right? That things got worse since 2016 due to the overreaction to Trump. Yeah, there's a very good case to be made here. That's why I'm so much more humble than I was, say, prior to 2018. Prior to 2016 election, I thought, yeah, maybe this is the Flight 93 election, but you can make a very good case that America would have been better off with Hillary Clinton as president. Think about all the online censorship that happened under Trump and then calmed down under Joe Biden. Yeah, so that's my new attitude, that we have to be humble in the face of reality. We just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, right? Reality is just way too complicated for us to get on our high horse and make any strong proclamations. It's interesting to bat the ideas back and forth. Obviously, that's what I do on a show, but I'd like to think that I don't do it with a great deal of pomposity, right? We have to be humble before the bewildering nature of reality.
They're about the next 4 years. And the question on the table is whether the president can function effectively in the next 4 years. And now the verdict from the public is resoundingly no. And you're left with the very, very difficult argument that, yeah, he's not, but the other guy is worse. I believe the other guy is worse. There's no doubt. And what masked by Biden's bad performance was the fact that Trump had a terrible debate.
All right, that's David Axelrod. And no, Trump didn't have a terrible debate. He had perhaps his best debate. So I like Tucker Carlson, and I simultaneously recognize that much of what he says is absurd, that he's a drama queen, that he's playing to an increasingly low IQ audience often. So Tucker says, if you're going to put Trump in jail, it better be for a very serious crime that everyone agrees he committed. Yeah, I agree with that. Otherwise, you risk destroying the system completely and forever. I don't agree with that. That's ridiculous. Right? Even with these various prosecutions of Donald Trump, it has not even come close to destroying the American legal system completely and forever. So Tucker says, we're in legitimate danger. Yeah, there are dangers now, as there have been dangers every single month of the history of the United States. Democrats need to pull back. All right, so Tucker says Biden's collapse makes this a much more perilous moment than it was. Okay, you can make an argument for that, but we've had a senile, checked out old man, not capable of more than about 6 hours of work a day for the past 3.5 years as president of the United States. And things haven't exactly gone to hell.
Yeah, which didn't matter. Biden was too busy exploding. And you're totally right. This 90 bad minute thing is about to turn into 180 very bad days. It's like, what? It's not going to happen again? Well, show us. I think they have about a week.
Right. The mainstream media is obsessed about this Joe Biden cognitive decline story.
To get Biden really out there, or this thing is, it's going to be a different world. And then all of a sudden,
if they could, they would.
Right. That's my point. It's easy to fix if he can fix it. Yet, he's not out there.
I mean, you guys would have had if you guys had a candidate who performed like this, and you were confident that he would just go out and do well. Like, would you not have had him on 60 Minutes by Sunday? I mean, that's
yes.
I think about campaigns in the past. It's like, Bill Clinton's on 60 Minutes, like, Jennifer Flowers breaks, and it's like they're easier out there doing an interview within 24 hours, maybe 48. But you're not like, hey, maybe we'll do a town hall meeting next week, or we'll do an interview with an influencer like 10 days from now. It seems like
or get Annie Leibovitz and do a photo shoot and turn off the phones at Camp David for a week.
That was unbelievable. That was really, really unbelievable. That's where they weren't gathering to talk about the campaign. They were gathering for an Annie Leibovitz photo shoot, which Vogue released the cover of today with the First Lady saying, "We'll make our own decisions."
Right.
Here's what.
So I hate to say that Elliot Blatt might have been right about something, but here's the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed taking an Elliot Blatt perspective.
Was there a Biden presidency? Scranton Joe was a fig leaf for a White House bent on woke appeasement. By Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. July 2nd, 2024, 5:20 p.m. Eastern Time. Is it time to rethink our picture of the Biden administration? Thursday's debate appears to have been a spin of the wheel by Joe Biden or his team. They hoped the coming and going of his lucid moments, he clearly has them, could be stage managed to coincide with the 90 minutes in Atlanta. The format, without an audience, with microphones silenced so candidates couldn't speak over each other, minimized stimuli to give Mr. Biden the best chance to husband his thoughts and energies. If so, they could clinch a picture of a president ready to handle a second term and put him mostly under wraps again. It didn't work, and no pill can fix the problem. I can only refer you to a column here on April 6th, 2021, on why a Joe Biden presidency looked so little like a Joe Biden presidency. It looked instead, I said, like the presidency of a man of diminished capacities acting out one long reaction to Kamala Harris playing the race card on him in the 2020 primaries. There's a reason, I added unkindly, that telemarketers target the elderly. Now at least the obvious discordance between claims about Mr. Biden's robust health and a need to keep him hidden has been resolved. In the new light, how are we thinking about his administration's continuing grift aimed at younger voters as if Mr. Biden can wave away their student debts? A climate policy that in record time degenerated into corporate welfare and organized labor payola, a border policy that amounted to abdicating border enforcement. Then there's Mr. Biden's disconcertingly robotic invocation on every Charlottesville anniversary of the bulging veins of racist protesters. His administration adopted a habit from day one of equating opponents with white supremacists. Why was Mr. Biden lending his presidency to unrepresentative activist groups to pursue an agenda for which he had no mandate? As worrisome, a visibly diminished presidential candidate, he seemed to gape on passively as Obama intelligence officials helped him get elected by falsely portraying his son's laptop as a Russian plot. Was he even consulted? His incoming team then advised him to appease, Vladimir Putin by reviving the...
Okay, so good question. Was there a Biden presidency? All right, Elliot Blatt could have written a column like that.
Here's what I hope. I hope that
the David Axelrod, you can tell he's not Mike Murphy or John Heilman because he speaks so slowly.
Decision they make, and it is his decision, the decision they make is a decision that has in mind his legacy, his reputation. This is a president who ran for president in 2000.
Handball right now, we just won't show it. Then he's a selfish guy. It's two selfish guys, two egomaniacs, all about them.
So I hear Democrats naturally talking about Joe Biden's great legacy. I'm unaware of anything positive in his life. I mean, how exactly would America have been crippled if Joe Biden had never entered politics and instead just become another used car salesman?
Not about you. And that is total kryptonite for Biden. So, boy, if he's not back and forth with a reporter on real TV in an interview in 48 hours and the bad polling starts to pile on them, they think they got a headache now with the party bucking. I think they have no idea what they're in for.
John, you're a voracious viewer of these interviews, though.
Yeah.
When was the last great interview that Joe Biden gave?
Well, I wouldn't say great, but when he was...
Yeah, it's been a long time since Joe Biden gave a great interview. And so Joe Manchin, U.S. Senator, was prepared on Sunday to go on talk shows and say the truth, right? That Joe Biden should obviously step down. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and various Democratic elites managed to bully him out of doing
the
that.
establishment rigging the process. We've got even more details from you that don't just have to do with the DNC. Let's put this up there on the screen. Here we have Ron Klain, the former chief of staff to the president, and then the person who also helped him prepare for the debate. He says it is 100%.
Yeah, it's 100% certain until it isn't. And if the media makes it their number one story, Joe Biden's cognitive decline, all right, you're going to see the dam break as more and more Democrats call for Joe Biden to step down until it becomes untenable for him to stay in the race.
100% certain that Biden is staying in the race. Big money donors, he say, don't get to dictate the nominee of the Democratic Party. Well, it's not like the voters really got to dictate the nominee of that party either, because there was no primary. They didn't even get to vote. There was no debate. There was nothing. They were hidden by people like you behind the curtain before we could no longer deny reality in front of all of our eyes. Let's go to the next one, please, because this is actually...
It is stunning how one man essentially decided he'd run for president, even though he was clearly cognitively impaired, and the incentives were so strong that nobody important on his side tried to stop him. And the difficulty in reporting this story of Joe Biden's cognitive decline was just too much for everyone.
The craziest one. This is, quote, behind the curtain inside the Biden Salvation Plan. Let's leave this up there just so I can read from it. A massive political PR personal campaign is underway to reject calls for President Biden to drop his re-election race and rally Democrats to move on from the public debate and about his age and his future. Biden has zero interest in stepping aside. First Lady Joe Biden, key family members agree. The intrigue, Biden is ducking tough interviews.
So Republicans must absolutely just stay substantially quiet, not do anything newsworthy, allow this to remain the fixation of the media, allow this to dominate the news.
And avoided no press conferences, is now considering both. He is looking for a town hall or a big one-on-one this month. During a family gathering at Camp David, Biden family members, including Hunter, went through with the long-scheduled session with celebrity photographer Annie Leibovitz. The Bidens insisted the president would stay in the race. They are all in and want him to stay. Behind the scenes, Biden friends are now blaming longtime aides who prepped Biden.
So I'm just thinking about how the bigger your embarrassment from your own ineptitude, the more vicious you'll be in response. So Israel was absolutely embarrassed on October 7. Their defensive system and their military intelligence and political elite were caught with their pants down. Israel mounted an absolutely pathetic defense, and Hamas terrorists just ran wild in the country for 3 days. And I think a large part of the reason that the Israeli response, particularly in the initial weeks, was so vicious and bloody towards civilians was just this rage at their own incompetence. Right, the Israeli military, political, and intelligence leadership could not handle their own feelings of rage and humiliation. That they lashed out at the Palestinians, because you'll notice as the months of fighting go on, the Israelis become more and more effective at reducing civilian deaths. So initially, the Israelis just wanted to slaughter Palestinians indiscriminately, which is the normal, natural human reaction to having your own side slaughtered. But then after a few months and overwhelmingly negative world reaction to the unnecessary civilian death toll in Gaza, then the Israelis started becoming much more selective about who they were slaughtering. But the Israelis were just filled with rage due to their own incompetence. I think Donald Trump must still be filled with rage, and part of him must know that he lost the 2020 election due to his own incompetence. If he could have just portrayed average competence with regard to COVID, he would have easily won re-election. But he lost because of his own incompetence, right? Republicans lost the 20 2018 midterm elections because of Republican, chiefly Donald Trump, incompetence. Donald Trump did not get much done in his first term because he has never shown much leadership ability. He's never been a particularly effective leader. Right? He's not been a great businessman. And that must make him filled with rage. And so, yeah, I believe he wants vengeance because he doesn't want to confront his own incompetence. He doesn't want to confront his own role in his own humiliations. And there's so much rage on the part of the Democrats and the media right now against the Biden administration because they don't want to confront their own role in failing to investigate Joe Biden's cognitive decline. And there's so much rage on the part of the Biden administration against everybody else for pointing out the obvious. Right? Nothing is more humiliating than when your own shortcomings are exposed and the whole world realizes that it's your fault, right? That you're incompetent, right? That's what Israel felt after October 7. It's what the Bush administration felt after 9/11. And so because the Bush administration couldn't handle the humiliation of the 9/11 attack and their own incompetence at stopping that attack, George W. Bush even ran for president and made it part of one of the presidential debates that he wants to reduce racial profiling of Arabs, right? That's what he was saying in 2000. So the Bush administration was incompetent with regard to the 9/11 attack, and then they tried to deal with their own humiliation by these unnecessary, disastrous wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Joe Biden and his team must be absolutely filled with rage right now at having their own incompetence and venality completely exposed. And if they have the opportunity to, all right, they're going to lash out in some massive way unless the narrative just becomes overwhelming against them. And I think President Donald Trump will be often a very nasty, petty president. Donald Trump is often a very petty, venal, self-centered, nihilistic man. He's deeply flawed. I still support him, but I recognize his very deep flaws.
They complained about everything from the data-heavy answers to his makeup to briefing on the camera angles. The president smoothed it over. He called former Chief of Staff Ron Klain, who I just referenced, to lead the team. And one of the things they talked about was that while he doesn't blame him for prep, that they will continue forward. The campaign spokesperson said that the aides who prepared President Biden have been with him for years. Ron Klain is expected to lead Biden's prep for now the second debate. And to be fair, Klain has led debate prep for every president since Bill Clinton.
And Stephen J. James has a good point. Crazy that we totally forgot about Ron DeSantis. Remember, he was the great Republican hope. He got so much press. Was it about 2.5, 3 years ago? All right, he was the overwhelming favorite, and Republicans and Fox News in particular just completely threw in with Ron DeSantis. But as more thoughtful observers noted at the time, people who actually knew Ron DeSantis, he's robotic and he's not going to be able to unleash the kind of enthusiasm that Donald Trump is. Now, I am 100% convinced that Ron DeSantis is a far more effective executive than Donald Trump, right? I would suspect in most situations, all right, Ron DeSantis would run rings around Donald Trump as an executive. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the charisma to get elected.
Clinton, so it kind of makes sense. Really, though, is inside this survival strategy. Number one is they want to, quote, dismiss bedwetting. They want to continue to go after anybody.
What a ridiculous, ludicrous, insulting term for people who are just pointing out the obvious. The president has no cognitive clothes, right? The president just is not equipped cognitively to handle his office, let alone campaign for another term.
Who is breaking ranks and say that they're bedwetters, that they're cowards, that they're not sticking by the president. They're trying to turn this into their Access Hollywood moment. Number two, quote, they want to squeeze polls for juice. Biden allies are circulating polls and focus groups showing that the debate did little to change the dynamics of the race. Not actually true, though, considering the poll that we just showed you in our last segment. Number three, this is the most important.
I mean, think about how embarrassing it must be to be a Democrat right now, right? Donald Trump was frequently embarrassing for Republicans who took their politics too seriously or who took their pro-Trump sympathies too seriously. This is the best analogy I can come up with. I'm a Dallas Cowboys National Football League fan, and the Cowboys were overwhelming favorites to win their first playoff game in January of this year against the Green Bay Packers, and the Cowboys were blown out. And so I just started laughing. And even though I was a Donald Trump supporter in 2015, 2016, I didn't take my support too seriously. And so when he would behave in a petty, childish, absurd way, right, I didn't find it embarrassing. I just recognized that he was in some ways a buffoon, in some ways he was venal, in some ways he was petty, that he was just a deeply flawed person. So I don't remember feeling embarrassed by Donald Trump, right? He behaved embarrassingly, but I never felt any embarrassment. But to have, as President of the United States, someone so cognitively impaired as Joe Biden, I would suspect that for hardcore Democrats, is that not embarrassing?
They want to warn of chaos. So remember that Jen Psaki clip I played for everybody earlier. But Biden allies are making plain in private conversation the perils of an open convention.
And Glib Medley says, yeah, the pants soiling brigade calls out the bedwetters.
Risks of picking a Democrat even more unpopular than Biden, namely Vice President Kamala Harris. So what they're doing is they're stabbing their own vice president in the back. They're like, see, she's even more unpopular. We can't run with her. They want to, quote, limit dissent. They're orchestrating supportive tweets by Clinton, by Obama, the ones I showed you yesterday. Those are happening after, quote, furious back-channeling by allies. They're keeping all elected leaders close. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, they're like, listen, guys, you're sticking with me and you're not going anywhere. Getting the donor class to chill out. They're getting specifically Jeffrey Katzenberg of DreamWorks fame to work the phones and to go after anybody who is saying that it is Biden should drop out. Quote, they want to prove vitality. That'll be an interesting one. Basically, they want to do the bait and switch that they did yesterday, which is they're like, look how good he is on these pre-scripted rallies surrounded by supporters. Why can't he have been like that at the debate?
So the chat says that Michelle Obama is the best man for the job. All right, I enjoy the Breaking Point show that I was just playing, but probably more important to hear from the political experts, David Axelrod and Mike Murphy.
Overseas on the trip to one of these trips when he was in
talking about last
maybe
time
in France,
and
there's not been some cataclysmic Biden interview that you can point to in the last year where he sat down with a network anchor or something and it just completely fell apart. So I don't really know what to make of that, except I totally agree with you guys. But here's the thing I agree with all the things you're saying, and I think the other thing, as I listened to you guys the other day and I've thought about this over the weekend, it's like, to just go back to campaign strategy 101, you're an unpopular incumbent. What do you have to do? You have to make the race a choice, not a referendum, right? And that was what this debate is always. That's what they've always been trying to do with Trump. Yeah. But this debate was supposed to be the place where that really got bootstrapped in a way. And instead, not only did he focus on the fitness questions about himself that are his biggest problem,
he never drew the contrast.
He also guaranteed that now he is going to be under microscopic scrutiny for the next.
It's all about him now.
It's all going to be about him. It's just going to be everyone fly specking everything he does. Sometimes it's not too hard to fly spec, but it's just going to be a constant question of, did he mess this up? Did he mess that up? Is that a sign of slippage? Is he, it's just, I don't really, how do you change that? Well, this is another question for later on. I don't know how you guys would approach to change that, but here's the other thing that befuddles me is, how is it possible you think about their strategy of this weekend? You said, Mike, quelling dissent, and trying to quiet doubts, right? But he basically, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama came out and supported him. There's not a single elected official right now, I believe, at state or federal level who's come out and called on him to drop out. There's no big donor. There have been some donors who've had a few like, well, we should have a conversation, but there's really not been a big defection from the donor class. If you're Biden and you're trying to get through this weekend, survive these 72 hours, you could look up and point to those all things as success, right? You would say, we've kept the party may be grumbling in private, but they're not grumbling in public. We got through this weekend and we engineered it, even with the Annie Leibovitz thing, so that it became clear by the end of.
There's no way to make this go away, right? This is one of those things that once you've seen it, you can't forget it.
by the fact that they have two synchronized stories in AP and New York Times that both said basically the same thing. The family's all for it. Jill's, all for it. Hunter's all for it, which is always very confidence
which is
inspiring.
an interesting addition there.
But he's and then here, we had this morning on what do you guys think about that? They got through the weekend. Is that, and how do you explain that there's been
First
so
of all,
little?
I mean there are two conversations going on, one public and one private. There were people you haven't heard, there were a lot of people you hadn't heard from. There were people like Jamie Raskin who said they were
Right. Every intensely identifying Democrat in America right now is despondent.
Conversation. He was honest about it and said there were conversations going on. But make no mistake, I mean, there's real concern and among people who have great affection for Joe Biden. I mean,
the last time I remember feeling this glorious as a Republican was after Trump won the 2016 election. And I guess there were various highlights, not many during his first term. But this sustained giddy feeling that I've had since the debate Thursday night, so it's going on 5 days now, I still have a giddy feeling.
But the reality is, they're worried about the House. They're worried about the Senate. He's running behind. He's now running behind the Democratic ticket. And the question is, how far behind can he run before you imperil their chances to win the House and to win the Senate? So, and obviously everyone is concerned about what he has pitched a lot of his campaign around, which is beating Donald Trump. So, I think there are people who don't want to leap ahead of him. I heard Debbie Dingell on TV yesterday, and it was, if you listen carefully, you might say she said, basically what she said was, as of now, he is our candidate, and he's been a great president. And as between him and Donald Trump, that's the choice. That's the choice I have, and the choice is easy.
Yeah.
That to me is a non-answer answer. So I think one of the most interesting things that the data points I'd point to is the fact that Lara Trump was out there condemning Democrats for thinking about replacing Biden. She said it would be an affront to democracy. So let's just breathe in the irony of that for a second, and then
fragrant. But it's very fragrant.
I mean, the fact that
great comment in the chat. Donald Trump will likely dig up another Christian fundamentalist to scare people about replacing him.
The circling of the wagons is happening among the Biden family and the Trump family.
Right.
Yeah, I think they've stopped the bonfire. And of course, us never Trump Republicans are kind of chuckling. Oh, maybe the Democrats who've been calling Republicans cowards for so long are getting a little taste of the won't go public. But when the next wave of public polls come, and if they're bad, the panic's going to start and the bonfire is going to blaze up again. Right. And I don't see any of that going away unless, again, Joe Biden can get out there and there still be a time lag and really be good answering questions back and forth, sharp mental stuff. And, I think they know that. So why isn't it happening? And that begs the question of can he or not? So the panic is totally capable of getting worse. The other thing they're doing, which irritates me, curious what David thinks,
attacking
is
podcasters?
They're making this argument. Pardon?
Attacking podcasters. That's
okay. Now
just
they're
a
fighting
bunch of podcasters who are driving this whole thing.
Blowhards and know-it-alls and everything.
Yeah.
I bumped into a Biden person here in Washington. I said, I'd talk, but I'm on my way to do the cover shoot for Bedwetting magazine. But the point being
a lot of competition for that, by the way.
Long line at the photo studio. But their argument, they have this phony magician card trick argument. It's not like a lie, but it's an assumption they're treating as a fact, which is, well, it's either got to be Biden or Harris, and he's better than Harris, so therefore it has to be Biden, which isn't really true. It's hard to do it, but it's not impossible if the stakes are really high.
We are going to take a quick break to do some business, but we'll be back in a jiffy with David Axelrod, but definitely not cheerleading.
Obviously, there was a big problem with Joe Biden's debate performance. And there's also just a tremendous reservoir of affection and love for Joe Biden in our party. And so this makes it a difficult situation for everybody, but there are very honest and serious and rigorous conversations taking place at every level of our party.
So I would ask this question. Do you know of, David, do you know of any honest, serious, or rigorous conversations taking place that involve the Biden campaign?
Well, I'm sure I have no doubt that that they are getting an earful and they are having a lot of conversations. I have no doubt about that. They're doing what a competent campaign should do, which is they're reaching out, with the exception that the candidate is.
Okay, looking at the chat, my giddiness is tempered by images of 300-pound Shaniquas stuffing ballot boxes. I don't believe there's any evidence that voter fraud has decided any significant American elections, certainly not for president or for the U.S. Senate. Stephen James says, if it makes you feel any better, the United Kingdom is 48 hours away from electing a left-wing bureaucrat, a London lawyer who thinks some women have a penis, right? But he's center-left. Now, center-right in British terms is centrist in American terms. So the British political spectrum has definitely shifted much more to the left than in the United States. Same with Australia.
It's not, which I think is a mistake, but if he unless he can't. But I know that they are not isolated.
Right.
They're not isolated from the reality. The question is how much information is being filtered to the president, right, and what does he know? Yeah. Because let me tell you something. Joe Biden is a guy who always believes that he can win. He's very competitive. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and that chip, is deserved in the sense that he won a race in 2020 nobody thought he could win. So he's like, his attitude, without having talked to him or any.
All right, that's absurd that Joe Biden just did a stunning political job. Just that the circumstances converged in his favor so that with COVID, he didn't have to get out there and campaign, and Donald Trump looked particularly incompetent, and that's how Biden squeaked through.
Yeah, the people around him. I'm sure part of his attitude is, I've heard this crap before, but this is qualitatively different. And the question is, what's filtering to him?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know the campaign people are hearing it. I have a firsthand basis on that, and and they're spending a lot of time blasting fire extinguishers at freaked out donors, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, but I've heard from donors, I've heard from office holders, I've heard and some of whom have been, most of whom, maybe all of whom have been stalwart supporters of Biden. It's not with a trace of happiness that they're, but they're genuinely concerned. Because here's the thing, everybody's sort of talking about how to get him through the next 4.5 months in an election that's about selecting a president for the next 4 years.
Right.
And that's, it's not, if you take one step back from all of this, you can sort of see the problem.
Well, and this goes to a thing, and David, you and I talked about this the other day, and this is that step back thing, which is, I just don't understand anybody who watches that debate and doesn't see what you're seeing, which is something anybody who's ever known an octogenarian has seen before. It's, and again, this, you hear, okay, he's lucid from 10 to 4, 10 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, like the president of the United States, we can count on him being lucid for 6 hours a day. It's kind of not like that job, right? It's a 24/7 job. Do you have a right to expect?
Which is why it ages people.
Right. Of course, it's the hardest job in the world.
Right.
And I find that, like, this is the thing that I don't.
Except for Donald Trump, he's the only president who has not dramatically aged in office.
I don't think, and Mike, you can speak to this a little bit, but because I want to ask you what you think could change the calculus, like, so should start to bring electeds or donors or whatever out in the open with what they're saying. Because I agree with David, the private conversations among donors and electeds is much, much harsher and is much more. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a majority of people who think that he should throw in the towel, but there's a much larger segment of the Democratic political class, donor and elected, that thinks that it should at least be on the table, and many of them are like, he's got to go. What they don't seem to get, and what's different about the bedwetting thing, it's like they're pissed. I've seen Democratic donors be panicked before, but they're not just panicked, they're pissed. They feel like they've been lied to. That's donors and electeds who feel like the White House and the campaign hid the ball on them and kept telling them that Biden was better than he is. And they looked at it on Thursday, and now there's there's panic plus resentment, like an anger over having been kind of taken hostages by the guy. And I think that's a really volatile situation for them to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a gaslighting problem. You know, they've been saying, oh, we got it. We're on top of it. We've won before. We have it figured out. And we're going to have a big debate, and we're going to show that Trump a thing or two. And it all turned out to be false. Yeah. And they know the stakes are high, and donors tend to freak anyway, but they've given them plenty of good reasons right there live on TV to freak over.
Yeah. I mean, the argument that you got to go with him because it's too risky to do anything else is, sort of, it becomes a battle of risk assessment, and the risk assessment took a huge shift, and so I don't know what's going to look. I've said from Jump Street that it's up to him. Even when I was talking about the wisdom of the race, and people were saying, someone should run against him, he would have been the nominee of the Democratic Party, I believe, even if someone had run against him. And no one wanted to weaken him in the battle against Trump.
Right.
And, you can argue in retrospect whether is that right or not. But I really believe he would have prevailed in that primary. And so, people didn't speak up and they didn't raise their concerns. Now we're down to the last straws, and the argument is being made, well, it's too risky now and the question is really, where's the greatest risk? Where's the greatest risk?
Because everything's risky. But if he's a surefire loser.
And the chat says Trump must spend an hour a week in the salon getting his hair colored to maintain his image. But if he didn't do it, right, if he got a bad hair job, it would just be entertaining. It would just be hilarious. He would be the butt of jokes. But the guy is seemingly indomitable. So even with the worst hair job in the world, all right, he would just carry on. And I heard this from Rob Long, one of the writer-producers on the TV show Cheers, that every 4 years during the presidential campaign, Americans get to vote for who they want to have the leading role in the country's #1 reality show. And right now, I think people want Donald Trump to have that leading role in America's reality show because, in part, he's just so damn entertaining.
Which may be the real consensus in another 10 days. Right. Then, what I believe their spin is that you can't undo Harris. So therefore it has to be Biden. And I think that's an assumption, and it would be very difficult, but I'm not sure that's a fact in this circumstance. Yeah. If Biden anointed somebody, particularly like Whitmer, the first female president, finished the job Hillary started, there would be a surge of love for Joe Biden. She's good, and there's the risk that she screws up, unvetted, all that. But if she had 3 or 4 days and all of a sudden the Dems are up 6 points in the key states, 5 or 6, and they're winners, I don't think the convention does blow up.
I'm not sure that the anointment strategy is feasible or desirable. I mean, I think that there would have to be some sort of competition. And, I got to say,
yeah, so the betting sites put the odds of Donald Trump being the next president of the United States at about 65%. So the odds certainly seem to be in his favor right now.
I mean, I haven't seen any data on this, but I'm not sure about even the Harris argument at this point. I'm not even sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. She might be better than Trump, although, boy, I can't say I'm enthusiastic about her as a candidate, but she's going to be a candidate if Biden runs anyway, because everybody will say, well, she starts in a year.
Right. So I don't know. I find the whole thing very depressing, honestly.
We can tell.
Yeah, no.
We're gonna have to go check on you.
And why are these men depressed? Because they have an exaggerated sense of their own importance, an exaggerated sense of their own capability of understanding the bewildering and incredibly variegated nature of reality that is beyond the ken of any one individual. So you might as well sit back and enjoy the show.
The polling question is a big question. I have donors, significant donors, basically saying, here, I'll read you one of these just because this is the kind of thing I heard all weekend long.
I don't want to hear it unless they're seven figures. You got to buy your way on here.
This is a pretty big.
You got to do a unit or more here. None of these 50 grand.
Yeah, exactly.
Loudmouths.
Yeah, those little exactly.
But he says, look, I said that a lot of donors are like, look, I want to abandon him, but are you guys really sure this is the right way to go? Let's look at all the polls and be frank in a few days. I think this will come down to the obvious intergroup, but to me, the worst case scenario would be if the numbers held reasonably well, and then they were able to say, see, we're okay. And then this person says, the irony, of course, is all of us who asked how these Trump donors could knowingly stand behind someone so obviously ill-equipped for the office. In one case, it's temperament, disposition, and moral character. And in Biden's case, it's obvious cognitive decline. But the playing games to the sanctity of the office is the same. And so the number, like, he's like, how long has this been? A bunch of, when do you think we'll get numbers? When do you think we'll get numbers? I looked at that CBS poll and I'm like, man, 27% of registered voters who think Joe Biden is mentally equipped to be president of the United States. How do you get elected president if only 27% of the people in the country think you have the cognitive health to serve as president?
I mean, I'll tell you what the Biden people would say, I'm sure, in retort. First of all, 50% thought, or 49% think Trump's not competent, and they also think that he is corrupt and a threat to democracy. I mean, I'm not endorsing the argument, but that's the argument they'll make. They will make it compared to what argument?
Yeah.
Well, they can't fix it. I don't believe they can fix it. I mean, yes, if he went out there and did 5 events a day and did if he pulled the Straight Talk Express Murphy out of mothballs and, did that kind of thing. But
yeah, so Joe Biden is the least left wing of any possible candidate for the Democratic nomination for president of the United States. So Elliot Blatt might be right that Kamala Harris will mobilize the right the way that Donald Trump mobilizes the left.
I mean, guys, he's not up. He can't do that. He can't do that. I mean,
45, according to this poll, 45% of registered Democrats think that he should step aside. And it's July 1st.
Yeah, and I think that number's only going to grow. And what happens if the Democrats don't select Kamala Harris?
List of Democrats: Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer. The list goes on and on and on. You've named 4 or 5 people. Where is their consensus? You've got to build consensus, and there is not consensus right now. If you pick a white man over Kamala Harris, black women, I can tell you this: we're gonna walk away. We're gonna blow the party up.
Wow. Here was
reaction. Nice.
South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Thank you for joining me.
God, Tim Scott is so incoherent. I can't stand to listen to him.
The convention's next month, and half of the Democratic Party thinks he should step aside. I just can't. I don't know how you look at those numbers and not just be like, "Holy fuck!" And that's just like the first real poll that we've seen after the debate that are really on the issues we care about.
And they're going to be more.
So, like, what are the numbers, Mike? But either one of you, what are the numbers that you think could come in the battleground states that were unequivocal, where you could where someone like Ted Kaufman and say Valerie, who are more like tethered to reality, I would say. She didn't want, but Valerie didn't want him to run in 2020. Ted talked him out of the race once before in the 88 race. They could walk in and go, Mr. President, this dog won't hunt. It's just not going to happen. What's the number have to be? You have to lose 5 points in the battleground states?
Well, I think outside the margin losing, but it takes a couple of days for this stuff to cook, and cable television on all channels now, not just Fox, is wall to wall. Can the president handle the job? And that's gonna That's going to build, and people are probably in the field now, or media polls are about to go in the field, and there's going to be, a building effect, and they'll start trickling back, and so I think it'll compound. But I would say a week from today, there will have been some. CBS, I don't think, put out a ballot number, but they might tomorrow. My guess is it was on the poll, and more will pop up. I mean, we remember how the New York Times already tied them in knots twice with their swing state poll, and there's another one of those coming, and it's not going to be better. I can't give you an exact number, but if he's losing every swing state and nationally, and we haven't seen him function other than reading a prompter for 8 minutes in front of a crowd, my view is the fuel for the fire is going to grow, not diminish, unless he can surprise all of us and go do it. And I know there are people around Biden who answer that with he's going to. You wait and see.
Right. Yes, I know. But I mean, they're saying what they should say. They're doing pretty much what they should do. But they're treading water here, trying to keep from drowning. And yeah, I mean, listen. They have.
So if we had national cohesion, if we had social trust, all right, if we had a sense of being one country, this wouldn't be decided by law. It wouldn't be decided by precedent. It would be decided the way these things are decided in Japan, by a common understanding of what's in the national interest. But we're so diverse, we're so varied, we have so little social cohesion and social trust that it's hard to get people to rally around a concept like the national interest, because people feel very little for each other.
And they employ tons of numbers crunchers, and they need to take the data they're getting and determine what the likelihood of winning is. And
so what I think will happen is that Joe Biden will step down, and that the Democrats will nominate someone else. I'll go with Gavin Newsom, right? Gavin Newsom as the presidential candidate, not Kamala Harris as his vice presidential candidate, because when something cannot continue, it eventually stops. And so I think the situation is more important than the law and the precedent and procedure. And that Joe Biden has already won these delegates enough to become the Democratic Party nominee for president. No, the situation is untenable. It's unbearable. A majority of Americans simply do not believe that that Joe Biden is cognitively up to the task of being president of the United States, including half of Democrats. Has Texas turned blue yet? I remember Eki Lux walking about this every single day back in 2018. Yeah, no. Texas has not turned blue, and it's not going to turn blue this year or any time in the foreseeable future. Do I think that Trump winning will be bad for the far right? Yes, because if Trump wins, many people who are on the margins of America now will have higher paying jobs, and America will be less maladaptively intervening in the world. And so life will get better for many Americans on the margins. And so the constituencies that would otherwise turn to far-right politics will instead be getting married and having kids.
I think, and then make a decision. What they shouldn't do is ignore that, though. What they shouldn't do is say, yeah, but that's now, and it's already late. I said the other night on CNN, I remembered this old Yogi Berra thing about the shadows in Yankee Stadium, and he said he was playing left field one day, and he said it gets late early out there. It's late. It's not early. Yeah. It's late, and time and because after a while there's no option. These next 10 days to me are like these are historic days.
Quickly, John, they've got a Republican convention coming that is not going to be pretty subtle. They're just going to sledgehammer crazy old man now.
Yes. Well, I'll get to that in 1 second, but I do want to ask you this question. One more question about this. The polling could. So one thing you could imagine.
Heilman must wait. Let me just interrupt you for a second. So Murphy Heilman must like write questions out and shit. We ought to think about that for our podcast.
No, I just write down.
work.
You should see.
Yeah, I know.
This does these questions just say things. You gotta step aside. Is the we've now, it's notable to me that Chuck, who there's been reporting now backing up my favorite source, the Daily Mail, which is that Chuck has been saying to people that he's open to an alternative if Biden shat the bed in the debate, which he obviously shat the bed in an epic and historic way. And Chuck has not been on television at all in this period. Everybody else has been on TV. Chuck has put out a paper statement or a Twitter statement or whatever, but Chuck's not been anywhere to be found. And you saw Hakeem Jeffries on Friday. He's been a little bit more out front over the weekend, being more pro-Biden. But on Friday, he was like, I'm going to see how he does on North Carolina. I'll let you know. I mean, those two guys who are totally obsessed by money for natural reasons because of their status within the caucus. Is there a world where, I guess, David, as someone who knows Biden well, does that weigh with him more? He's not going to listen to Obama and Clinton, which is my view of why they put those statements out, because they knew that if they didn't put those statements out, if they stayed silent, Biden would be more likely to stay on the ticket because
I think that
they were buying him time, right?
Listen, Joe Biden is a creature of the United States Senate. That's where he spent much of his life. And I think he probably would be sensitive to arguments about the House and Senate. And, the prospect of Trump with...
Right, when the polls become overwhelming, that the Democrats are heading for an epic defeat, then Joe Biden will feel increasing pressure and will finally drop out.
The 55-seat Senate and the House is, that's
clarifying.
I'm definitely on that plane to Portugal in that circumstance. Jesus.
Yeah, and
the other one
be a big trail behind you.
Pelosi, because she's kind of a peer. She retired.
Yeah,
right.
She's tough. She's culturally from his world. I think she could be influential.
Yeah, she could say, "Kid."
Yeah. Listen, youngster.
Yeah. I mean, she's the party elder, but she's been very supportive so far. And, she may be concerned about the process moving forward. If she can be persuaded, maybe that it could lead to something better, she might move. But she's certainly a sensitive. I mean, look, I'm hearing about districts where, Biden is not only districts where districts he won by 10 points where he's behind right now.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, L.A. County, 10 days, 10 million people, as big as Michigan and Georgia. 10 days before the debate, his favorable was 52, his unfavorable 46, and that's a county he won with 71% of the vote. Now, he's going to win it, but there were huge problems with this candidacy before the debate. So it's not like, oh, thank God we had a lead and now we're in a tight race. No. There's trouble out there. They want to fire him.
Jeez, for a second there, Murphy sounded a little like Trump. You're fired. You're fired.
So when will Joe Biden make the decision, the same way that alcoholics decide to stop drinking, when the pain of continuing on the path that he is on outweighs the pain of taking a different path, then Joe Biden will take a different path. Right? When he's facing an epic defeat and the Democratic Party faces a historical blowout, then the pain of continuing on with his denial path will become overwhelming for the Biden administration, and Joe Biden will drop out.
Fired. We can fire that guy. Anyway, we should probably take this moment to sneak in one more break.
Okay, that'll do it for me. Take care.